to in Elgin Street. The town did convene a public meeting back in June of 2014. The amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw and the draft plan approval were approved in July of 2014. Post-2014, Vandyk had made a number of engineering submissions to the town to attempt to clear the conditions of draft plan approval. And this involved a detailed review of engineering drawings, detailed reports and studies and background related to the subdivision, along with numerous meetings with technical agencies. In June of 2017, Vandyk requested and received a 2-year extension to draft plan approval from Council in order to provide some additional time for Vandyk to clear the conditions to the draft plan approval. Otherwise, the draft plan approval would have lapsed. In April of 2018, Cobourg Council granted pre-servicing approval to Vandyk to allow the construction of the underground infrastructure associated with the internal subdivision property, and a pre-servicing agreement was entered into between the town and Vandyk Group of Companies. And this agreement is registered on title to the lands. So the construction of the internal services was undertaken over a period through the summer of fall of 2018, but activity did cease to continue in the winter of 2018-2019. In July of 2019, the conditions of draft plan approval for the subdivision did expire, and therefore a new application for draft plan of subdivision was required and submitted in the same form and design as originally proposed by Vandyk in 2013. A number of reports and plans were submitted in conjunction with the application, including a planning and urban design report, a public consultation strategy, stormwater management report, a traffic impact analysis, environmental noise analysis, and the draft plan of subdivision. The applicant, subsequent to Council's receipt of the application in June, the applicant convened a virtual public open house in August of 2020, where a number of area residents attended and asked questions. A quick summary of the land use permissions that currently affect the subject property. The subject lands are currently designated Neighborhood General and Service Commercial in the New Amherst Community Secondary Plan, and are zoned Neighborhood Residential Exception 1 Holding Zone and District Commercial Exception 27 Holding Zone in the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw. The existing NR2 zone and DC 27 zone permits the proposed land use by Vandyk, therefore a zoning bylaw amendment is not required. The applicant is only seeking approval of a draft plan of subdivision at this time. The application has been circulated to the town's development review team and applicable partner review agencies for analysis and comment. And following this public meeting this evening, all department and agency comments, as well as public submissions, will be reviewed by the planning department, and a detailed report will be provided to Council for consideration at a later date. So that provides a little bit of the background leading up to present day and the public meeting that we have. Vandyk has a presentation for Council and an overview of the application and draft plan of subdivision in a little more detailed under the next item, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGlashan, and a nice segue into the second item, which is to welcome Justin Mamone on behalf of Vandyk West Park Village Limited to provide the background and an explanation of the application for approval of the proposed draft plan of the subdivision, the vacant land situated immediately west of Canadian Tire. Good evening and welcome, Mr. Mamone.
Good evening, members of Council. Just for everyone's benefit, Justin Mamone from Vandyk is sitting behind me. My name is Paul Demchek with Batory Management. I'm the planner on behalf of Vandyk, and I prepared a presentation for everyone's benefit tonight. I'll try my best not to reiterate too much of what Glenn has already outlined. Obviously, the subject lands are currently vacant. They're located on the south side of Elgin Street West between Rogers Road and Wilkins Gate. As Glenn noted, the applicant is seeking to develop the lands with commercial uses on the northern portion of the property, which is adjacent to Elgin Street, and then the south side of the lands would be used for residential purposes. Again, as was previously approved through the original plan of subdivision, what is before you tonight is essentially a mirror of that original approval. Just in terms of surrounding context, these are some of the uses, adjacent uses along Elgin Street. These are some of the existing typologies of residential uses to the west of the site, residential uses to the south of the site, and then to the east of the site being the Canadian Tire lands and associated retail uses. Without reiterating everything in terms of the application history, obviously the original applications were approved in terms of the official plan amendment, zoning amendment, and draft plan of subdivision in 2014. The draft plan approval, which was approved, and then there was the extension of a 2-year extension, had lapsed. So what is before you today is essentially the exact same plan of subdivision that was previously approved, and Vandyk is obviously here to re-engage the municipality and council on proceeding with that draft plan approval. As Mr. McGlashan noted, we had a virtual open house meeting in August of this past year, consistent with Council's recent guidelines for additional public engagement for draft plans of subdivision and other Planning Act applications. Some of the comments that came out of that meeting, without going over all of them in detail, included issues around traffic, issues around the existing site conditions, as well as the fact that the site had expired in terms of approval, not only from a draft plan of condition standpoint, but also from a Terrion standpoint. I want to just make it clear for the benefit of council and for the public tonight that Vandyk is seeking approval for the draft plan of subdivision. They will not be building the residential units under their Terrion license, which has essentially lapsed. They are not legally allowed to sell any residential units. Their intent is to finalize draft plan of subdivision and sell the lots to a future residential builder to carry on and eventually sell those units with an appropriate Terrion license. Mr. McGlashan had already explained the Cobourg official plan and zoning bylaw, so I won't waste everyone's time on that. But again, nothing from an official plan and zoning perspective is changing, and the application conforms to the zoning as well as the official plan. In terms of the proposed draft plan of subdivision, I've shown just an outline here. So what you see in the north is block 20, which is the larger block adjacent to Elgin Street, and then internal to the site are the residential blocks with an extension of Greenlee Drive, which is the proposed residential access to the site. There is also an emergency access only for emergency vehicles that extends through the north of future Cowan Circle and then through the commercial block to the north. There is also a central park located at the center of the site. Here's a rendering, colored rendering of the proposed draft plan of subdivision, specifically the residential portion of that draft plan. You can see the park located in the middle, and then the various unit types and typologies surrounding the site. This is just a concept site plan for the commercial block. Conceptually, as Glenn had noted, there's up to about 10,000 square feet of gross floor area over potentially 3 blocks. Again, this is just a larger image or outline of the plan. And then here are a couple of just very brief renderings of what the commercial block could look like down the road once developed. And finally, one more rendering of the residential townhomes. Vandyk had envisioned these being similar to the existing typologies of 1 story in height. Each unit would have 2 parking spaces. These are not rear access. They're all accessed off Cowan Circle, which is the future proposed road within the draft plan of subdivision. In my presentation here, I've just outlined a brief conclusion, essentially stating that the proposed draft plan of subdivision is consistent with the provincial policy statement, growth plan, as well as the official plan and existing zoning bylaws, as I had noted, and is intended to be consistent with the original approval and fit in with the existing build form and within the community. I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have, as well as any questions from the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the detail in the presentation. Just before we move on to public submissions, I will open up the floor to members of council should they have any questions for the director or the planner. Members of council? Councillor Darling?
Yes, thank you, sir, for your presentation. I remember from the last draft subdivision plan, there were some current concerns of stormwater. Have you completed a full stormwater plan for the property, and could you explain a little bit if you have it?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so as part of our recent draft plan of subdivision submission, we've submitted updated functional servicing reports as well as detailed grading plans as part of that. Obviously, from the municipality's perspective, the town's, I'll say, typical conditions of approval will ensure that all stormwater management is retained on site. I know we've heard as well from our virtual open house meeting we had back in August, that was a high priority concern of the public, just based on existing conditions as well. So we've addressed that from my perspective within the functional servicing report by our civil engineer, and we're going to have to make sure we fulfill that as part of our approval for a draft plan of subdivision.
Thank you very much. Your worship?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I can go back to your proposed draft plan diagram, I'm very aware of Greenlee Drive, but on the opposite end towards Elgin, there appears to be a pedestrian pathway. Could you just add a bit more detail? And am I viewing it appropriately? And that would be defined as, I don't know if it's defined as Block 21, but I'm looking for clarity of that particular space. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I've got it outlined. You can see it as well in that image, as well as the image I believe that's shown behind me. You can see Block 21. You're correct. It's essentially it's an emergency access is the primary intent, which connects Cowan Circle through the commercial block onto Elgin Street. The intent of that primarily is to allow for, I mean, at a worst case scenario, fire trucks, emergency vehicles to allow to go through there in case there is a potential blockage of Greenlee Drive. It is not intended for typical vehicular traffic, residential vehicular traffic, or the like, to access or enter or maneuver through that block. It is primarily for emergency access. In theory, there could be obviously pedestrian access through that site that would also connect to the commercial block.
Thank you for that. The Deputy Mayor, then to Councillor Chorley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions. You had a 2-year lapse, and I wasn't on that original council when you presented, but my concern is what guarantee does council have, does the town of Cobourg have, that what we're seeing tonight will actually take place when you sell basically an approved, if this does get approved, site plan to an unknown planner, an unknown builder, and what happens if this comes back and it's nowhere near what we have seen with Vandyk over the years? And there have been problems with traffic, there have been problems with sites not cleaned up properly and on time. So now we're dealing with a totally unknown builder that's going to come to Cobourg and build. Well, we see your plans here, but obviously you won't be building as per your statement. So please satisfy those concerns, and what are the timelines for when this unknown builder will come and actually build these homes and build them to these specs?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for your comment. We heard that comment as well. I would say that's probably was the #1 priority comment we heard from our virtual open house meeting back in August. My comment at the time, and I think I'll be consistent as well, like obviously it's Vandyk's intent to, and we're here before you this evening, to achieve approval only for the draft plan of subdivision. The municipality, obviously through those conditions of draft plan approval, as well as through typical securities and letters of credit that are common in plans of subdivision to ensure that that subdivision is built as per municipal standards, are going to be required to be posted through those conditions, and Vandyk will be required to fulfill those as the municipality essentially stipulates. In regards to your comment about a future builder, obviously Vandyk is looking to sell to a reputable builder. I know they're working through current terms of agreement. I'm not at liberty to share those today. There's no deal that's been finalized, but we're not, obviously Vandyk can't build. They wish they could, but they're not in a position to build under Ontario rules. So we are working with a reputable builder, I will say, obviously, and they're going to be required to fulfill those same conditions that the municipality stipulates for the plan of subdivision. We're working with the existing approved subdivision we had before. We want that to be carried forward as was originally approved, and the intent is to sell it to someone who will do the same.
Thank you for those comments. Councillor Chorley, and then back to the mayor.
We've heard quite a lot of feedback from members of the public who have raised concerns about traffic along Greenlee Drive and the concentration of traffic through that one basically entrance and exit to this new subdivision. I'm just wondering if you've considered adding a second point of entry. I notice in the plans for the commercial portion of the development, there appears to be an entry and exit off of the Canadian Tire lands. Have you considered that as an option, or any other second point of entry into the subdivision?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. I agree. We have heard as well those comments from the public. We did look at a number of different options. I would say, firstly, we were not able to, and we can't achieve any access through any neighboring properties to get a secondary access through our site. We did also discuss the matter with our traffic engineer in terms of an exit potentially through the site. There's two comments that are that we have that we can provide to you from our traffic engineer and from that traffic report. So the first one being that the intent of the original subdivision was for this essential design to always occur, and the traffic flows within the subdivision could accommodate the proposed units that we have. And then secondly, the commercial block that we have on the north end of our subdivision is currently a right-in, right-out access only. If we were to propose a future access, it doesn't meet the typical requirements, or the standard requirements, I'll call it, for minimum distance requirements between lights for another full move access, and wouldn't safely function. In the original subdivision approval, this was consistent with this current plan was consistent with that original design as well. So we kind of factored in all of those issues, as well as the comments from the public, noting that obviously that was a concern.
Did you have a follow-up to that?
I do have a follow-up. I notice you've referenced several times that this is consistent with the previous approved application, but I would just note that this is a separate application in a different council now. So again, really looking for clarity on the issue of traffic. Can you just shed some more light on, I'd like some more information about when you reference the distance between traffic lights. Can you just explain that a little bit more? You're referring to along Elgin Street, and you're talking about a potential entrance running through the commercial zone. Can you just explain in more detail why that's not feasible?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. I will caveat everything I'm about to say that I'm not a traffic engineer, so I won't purport that I am. In saying that, it's my understanding through our traffic engineer that between existing conditions of intersections, full signalized intersections, there are minimum distance requirements within the typical standards by both the province and I believe the municipality for what where you can locate a new additional full move traffic light. Based on the existing conditions between Wilkins Gate and Rogers Road, which I believe are two fully signalized intersections, we don't have enough clearance room in between those to locate a new full signalized intersection.
If I may, I'm just going to go to the mayor, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Chorley. Your worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps to the speaker or Mr. McGlashan, I know Deputy Mayor raised a point, but I believe this could all be dealt with through a holding symbol. So could I have either one of you comment in that regard, please?
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you. With respect to the question of the mayor, with respect to the draft plan of subdivision, the issues of redesign and modification to the draft plan really cannot wait until a holding symbol category, just simply because this is the principle of approval for a draft plan of subdivision. So post-draft plan approval, there would be a number of conditions placed on the draft plan of subdivision, which would all need to be satisfied. Many of these, most of these are technical, engineering, transportation, site design, grading, servicing type of issues. So they're very technical items related to that draft plan of subdivision. So at this point in time, the approval of the draft plan of subdivision is, as you see it. If council, if they wishes to modify or change that plan, they would have to make that direction. And obviously, Vandyk would have an opportunity to agree or not agree to those changes. But one thing I will note, and it's very important that has not been raised at this point, is that Elgin Street West along this frontage of property is not a town-owned, town jurisdiction roadway. It is under the authority of the County of Northumberland. And as we have heard this evening, excuse me, the traffic engineers, and again, I am not an engineer either, or a traffic expert, but the traffic consultants that have been retained by Vandyk and reviewed by both the county and town engineers has indicated that both the existing transportation system within New Amherst, that being Greenlee Drive and Carlisle Street, is adequate to handle the additional volumes that the subdivision will provide. And as Mr. Demchek has indicated, the entire New Amherst Community Secondary Plan area actually contemplates that this development area be absorbed and accessed internally through the New Amherst community area. The only access points to County Road 2 that are permitted are New Amherst Boulevard, which is a signalized intersection, Wilkins Gate, which is a full move but unsignalized intersection at present, and the Rogers Road intersection, which is signalized. So as Mr. Demchek did indicate, the spacing requirements under the Transportation Association of Canada guidelines specifies a certain distance between full signalized and full move intersections, which this particular location would not meet. Also, with respect to the potential use of a driveway or an access to County Road 2 from the residential, it has the potential opposite effect of allowing more commercial and other traffic to actually infiltrate into the subdivision, which would be unwanted, I would think, into the subdivision neighborhood. So that is certainly a possibility that you have to take into account. But just getting back to the county road issue, the County of Northumberland has reviewed the traffic information and has indicated that they will not accept any further residential traffic from this subdivision onto County Road number 2. The commercial component of the development provides about 4 to 5 times the amount of traffic that the residential component would, and as Mr. Demchek has indicated, the commercial site itself will have a right-in, right-out only because of the traffic volume implications along County Road 2, which, as you know, is a major regional arterial. It's 5 lanes. As part of the previous Canadian Tire approvals, there was consideration for an easement for the commercial component of this particular development to use that driveway as a full move. The traffic consulting report did indicate that after build-out, without any residential traffic, that driveway at Canadian Tire will function at fair to poor, which means that there would be congestion, there would be potential delay and long lines at that driveway, and as everyone maybe has tried to turn left out of the Canadian Tire driveway on a busy day, it is very difficult, even under present conditions. So adding more traffic to County Road 2 would be, in the opinion of the traffic experts, much more significant impact on the public than the residential traffic going to Carlisle and Greenlee, which, as the traffic consultants have indicated, are adequate and satisfactory to accommodate that. So, sorry, that is, hopefully, that was a long way around, Mr. Mayor, to answer your question, but I don't think those issues can be factored in at the holding stage, because that is at the end of the approval process.
Thank you to the director. I appreciate the context from the county perspective on Elgin there. To the mayor, did that answer your question regarding the H symbol? Great. Back to Councillor Chorley.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. McGlashan, for just clarifying that Wilkins Gate is not a fully trafficked intersection. Can you please help us to understand how pedestrian flows will work in and out of this subdivision? Again, looking at Greenlee Drive, I don't believe there are sidewalks there. And so what is the plan in terms of the movement of people and foot traffic?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. I've got a slide up on the screen now which shows some of the proposed pedestrian connections. So there are new sidewalks proposed within the plan of subdivision, as well as a sidewalk which is showing here on the west side of Greenlee Drive, extending into the existing subdivision to the south. And obviously the sidewalk is proposed around some of the internal units on Cowan Circle, and then there's obviously the emergency access, which again is primarily used for emergency vehicles in that event, but it can be accessed by pedestrians as well.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions from other members of council? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. We will move on to the public submission portion of the public meeting. Just a quick note for procedure. We will be starting with inviting members of the public in the gallery to come forward for submissions or comments in support of the development application, and then followed by public submissions in opposition or concerns to the current proposal. When you do come forward to the podium, just kindly ask you to state your name and address for the public record. Mindful of physical distancing, so I will just ask you to identify who would like to speak, and then you can gesture to yourselves as to the order in which you'd like to speak. So with that said, starting with inviting members of the public to come forward for any comments in support of the project. Seeing none, we will move on to item number 2 under public submissions, which is inviting members of the public to come forward with comments or questions regarding concerns or oppositions to the proposal. I just ask you to come up in your own order. Just identify, no particular order. You can just come forward to the podium. The clerk will instruct you there. Thank you.
I brought these. I don't have a fancy to do, but okay. Hello, my name is Linda Wittenbowles. I live at 808 Carlisle, and one of the townhouses, not the two-story, the single ones. And my back laneway backs directly onto this proposed subdivision. In May of this year, okay, sorry. In May of this year, I wrote to Councillor Beattie with regard to what was going on in the subdivision. The mess, the mud, the weeds, the supposed to be a fence that was protecting us from all the wind blowing and all this, nothing was done. And I had a few other comments in there as well about how things were being maintained. Nothing ended up being done by either Vandyk or the town with that regard. It still looks like it did, and if you have my copy of my letter, we included some pictures, and it was not very nice. She sent me, by email again, an account of Vandyk's dealings with the town and their lack of action for the plan which was approved in 2014. I was also not very happy with the way things appeared to have gone. It appears that they just let everything lax, they put everybody off, and we who are living there are the ones that ended up with all the mess. So when the sign went up for the new draft plan, I wrote another letter, which was all handwritten. I'm sorry, I'm not computer literate. I hope you could read it. And my neighbor Sandy Cohen and I got together and decided to talk to our neighbors and get a petition going specifically to do with the exit on Greenlee. We really are opposed to it. And then another neighbor, Kathy, Kaylee, she would be talking as well. She got a petition as well. Now, just picture this. Three mature women walking around with masks in a pandemic, knocking on doors and asking people for signatures. It wasn't trick or treat, it wasn't fun, but we did it. We did it because we really felt that we needed to do it. In one block, just one block, it took me 3 hours because everybody that I talked to was venting. They were angry about the traffic, they were angry about this potential one exit onto Carlisle. Everybody that was asked signed the petition, and it was all against the single access onto Greenlee. The 72 homes that are planned, with, I believe you said 2 parking spaces, that includes one of the garages, right? So it's 1 parking space and the other is a garage. Those people are going to have visitors. In today's world, you've got Amazon, you've got FedEx, you've got everything is being done by delivery. All of that traffic is going to be going in and out of Greenlee. Our laneway is our only exit. If something happens, if there is a fire, a garage fire or something, we have no other exit except Greenlee. We're stuck there. And it has happened once before that they actually, somebody knocked on the door and said, you better get your cars out of there because we're closing off the street tomorrow. So we had to put all our cars on the street. Now, that's one time that happened, but we can anticipate that it will happen again in the future. Now, what I did is I took your little map and I blew it up. I think some of you have a copy. I only got to do a few of them. But I took your little map and I highlighted in red the areas that are going to be going directly onto Carlisle, 1 block south of Carlisle and our townhouse complexes, and 740, the access of the townhouses on the corner of Rogers. If you look at the way Carlisle curves, going towards Rogers, going east, there are 5 intersections on the south side at that curve. On Greenlee, coming down from the laneway and from the laneway from 740, that also is coming onto Carlisle, right at that curve. Now, there's also a mailbox there where people have to stop and pick up their mail, and the people who deliver the mail are sometimes parked there for a good half hour. There is parking all along the north side of Carlisle at that particular spot. Now, if you've got cars parked on that side, and you've got the mail people over here, and you've got cars coming in both directions, you slam on your brakes, because the sight line at that bend in the road there is very bad, and winter's coming again. And you're going to have all kinds of problems with that as well. So, the other thing I'd like to point out is I only went 1 block south of Carlisle. But if you look even on the other side of Rogers, all those people come out onto Rogers. And they go north on Rogers. And where are they going? They're going to a congested area, the Canadian Tire, the Walmart, the mall, the Home Depot, the 401. All of those people, to get access to those properties, have to come out of Rogers onto Elgin. That's going to increase way more than what you're just talking about, the subdivision. All of those cars, all of those visitors, all of those delivery trucks, all of those people are going to be going in and out of Greenlee and up and down Carlisle, which is already a problem. So, what else have I got here? Yeah, the sight lines are a big, big issue on Carlisle. I noticed that one day, a couple of weeks ago, there was a traffic counter across the road on Carlisle, I believe it was. I don't know who it was, but it was only there for a day. And frankly, if any one of you wants to come and sit on my front porch on a Saturday afternoon and watch what's going on, you're more than welcome to come. So, let me see where I am here. I was told before I came here, a few people, that this was all a waste of time. The decision has already been made, and that's it, don't bother. But I hope not. This is a draft plan of approval. Plan of subdivision, which means it is subject to change. It's a draft plan. The other one's dead. This is all new. Vandyk's lack of action on the 2013 plan, which they put forward, they're back to square one. They forfeited their right, their chance to go ahead with this. We now need to do it for us, and we need you to listen to it. The town planning department is full of people. They've got all kinds of letters after their name and all hard-earned designations. Surely somebody can come up with some kind of a plan to make this work properly, even if it's only a right turn onto Elgin with a flashing light, something to alleviate some of the traffic. We need your help to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for reiterating your comments and concerns to council. Much appreciated. Any other members of the public who would like to make questions or comments? Yes, please come forward. Thank you. And just a reminder to your name and your address, please. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Francine Burkett. I live at 740 Carlisle. I should say my husband and I. We live in the condominium, which is at the corner of Rogers and Carlisle. We have 25 units. And talking about laneway, we exit into the laneway, which then exits onto Carlisle. Oh, sorry. So we have an issue that we already have a whole bunch of people. There's 20 townhouses that are to the west of us, and they use the laneway in order to get to their garage. So they're turning into our little laneway in order to get to the back of their houses. So we're all trying to get out through this laneway onto Carlisle and at the point of the curb that's the previous speaker mentioned. So we have this site issue as well. Assuming that 10 of the townhouses exit on our side, as opposed to the Greenlee side, we're dealing with at least 35 cars at any one point, times twice a day or 3 times a day, people coming in and out of work. So we already have to deal with the issue of people parking on Carlisle, on the north side, as we already mentioned. So that makes it kind of difficult just to get out of our, onto Carlisle. So if we're dealing with 72 new homes, and most people are working couples, so now we're dealing with 144 cars. And again, just one exit doesn't seem reasonable. Should traffic back up on Greenlee, sure, they're going to try to use the little laneways to get around. And the laneways, we have kids playing in the back, and it's narrow, and again, it creates the bottleneck at our condominium. So I'm quite concerned about that. So I'm also concerned about the increase of the eastbound traffic going towards Rogers because of this. It sounds to me as if it's kind of a take it or leave it scenario being presented to us in terms of that there's no possibility of getting Greenlee to be extended out to Highway 2. Then my proposal is reduce the capacity, put less units in there so that there's less congestion that's going to be thrown onto Carlisle. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for coming forward with your comments. Are there any other members? Welcome.
Hi, I'm Jackie Kirtley, and I live on Rutherford Street, which comes out onto Carlisle. And everything that I wanted to say has already been said, but I'll just say from my point of view, living on Rutherford. When I come up to the top of Rutherford to exit my street, half the time I cannot get out. There's cars constantly parked all the way along Carlisle. There's a post box opposite, so you've got cars on either side, and I cannot get out of my street, let alone if there's traffic coming. And when we go to talk about Rogers Road, there is a pedestrian walkway across, and I don't bother moving my car to go to Metro or to go to Canadian Tire. But I have nearly been hit there 3 or 4 times by people who think they can drive faster than I can walk. And most of the time they're right. But I've actually had my shopping bags knocked out of my hands. Carlisle Street is a disaster waiting to happen. If we have another 140 cars coming out from Greenlee, who's going to be responsible for the first child or the first senior who's going to get killed there, right? And to have a little loop going around with 72 houses with 2 parking lots. One is in the garage. Well, most of the time, I've never seen Canadians use their garages for their cars. It's always full of junk, right? So where's their second car going to go, right? Where's their visitors' cars going to go? Where is their mailbox going to go? Please answer all these questions before somebody gets killed on our road. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll make sure that your concerns are reflected back to both the proponent and the planning department. Any other members of the public? Yes, please come forward. Thank you.
Jane McCaig. I live on Wilkins Gate, and my property is right, well, I guess it backs on to the proposed subdivision. And for 2 summers, all of us who backed onto that proposed subdivision watched and listened and felt all the machinery going up and down day after day after day after day, moving dirt around. That's all they did. They moved dirt around for 2 summers and a couple of falls and a couple of springs. And they made a lot of mess. They tore up a lot of trees, and they damaged everything behind us, all views that were, they just put weeds in place. We were very glad when they finally left and left the weeds. They were better than the machines. Everything else that people have said is quite true. The subdivision is far too big for the property. There should not be 72 houses built in there. 25 would be the most that could possibly exist or coexist with the rest of us. It's just far too small for that many houses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please come forward. Are other members of,
Question when they were talking about these traffic engineers. Was this traffic engineer, first of all, was it paid for by Vandyk? And the second question is, was that back in 2013 or 2014? Because we've got twice as many houses in New Hamhurst and Wilkins Gate and West Park now. So that was two questions that I'd like to be answered.
Mr. McClashen, would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, as per normal procedures, an applicant is responsible for submitting all detailed technical reports at their cost. So yes, they did pay for a traffic consultant to undertake the traffic review. That review was conducted early in 2020. The initial report was submitted with their application in June of 2020, and they have also undertaken follow-up analyses with their traffic consultants as recent as this month, I think as was referenced by a member of the public, and that information has just been submitted to the town. In terms of when the reports were undertaken, as I think I just indicated, they were conducted in 2020.
Thank you very much. A final invitation to members of the public to come forward with any final comments? Okay. Thank you very much for everyone who participated. Moving on to the clerk for any written comments, submissions received by yourself as of printing of the agenda.
Madam Chair, I can advise that we received one written correspondence from Cobourg resident. His name is David Cameron. It has been circulated to members of council and will be made as part of the record and attached to the minutes.
Thank you, much appreciated. And now over to the Director of Planning to advise of any additional written submissions received from commenting agencies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only formal submission that we did receive was from the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, and that submission, there were no comments or objections to the application as it was outside of their range of influence for the Highway 401.
Thank you for that. And finally, just to wrap up the public submission component of the meeting, the applicant has an opportunity to respond if desired, if you want to address any of the questions that were raised by the public this evening.
Just very briefly, for the benefit of council and for the public, I appreciate both myself and I'm sure Vandyk appreciates everyone's comments and concerns we heard tonight. Obviously, you know, it's going to have to go back to the departments and to planning staff prior to a recommendation report being brought forward. We're happy to take these comments back and look into them and address what we can. Thank you.
Thank you, much appreciated. Moving on, we'll just go into the final portion of the agenda, which is a statement of further notice. And this is just a notification that to all persons requiring notice of passage of the proposed approval of the draft plan of subdivision are to advise the municipal clerk of their name and address to ensure receipt of notice. And you can register that via email at clerk@cobourg.ca to stay informed of developments. We have completed the public submissions portion of the agenda. And any additional questions or comments, I encourage you to email them to the clerk at cobourg.ca, and they'll be forwarded to the planning department for reflection before the recommendation comes forward to council. Okay. With that, we'll call for an adjournment of the public meeting. Councillor Darling, all in favor?